Well, this looks like another NAS from Synology, a nice Rackmount unit. Dual power supplies, 550 watts, but this is actually a new product. This is ActiveProtect. The ActiveProtect appliance line is finally here. This is the DP7400. I think this could be a little disruptive. I mean, it could become a major disruptor in the backup space. Synology is aiming to sort of replace and disrupt the status quo in backup software and hardware. Think about things like Veeam or Cronus or other solutions like that. They plan to disrupt the incumbents by giving you the complete hardware and software solution that doesn't go hard on the subscription model. I don't know if you've priced enterprise-grade server software lately, backup software, but it's kind of pricey. They're after the most common small and medium business backup scenarios, data retention policies, virtual machine management, things like ransomware protection. When we say ransomware protection, we need some sort of mechanism to have immutable backups. Even if the ransomware gets a password to your backup appliance, they can't just zero the backup appliance. And yeah, it is scalable. Like what Synology is working on will scale up to 100,000 devices, but well, beyond that even. But the key players have forgotten what people with modest needs need in a backup solution. So Synology has the right idea with what I'm about to show you. And it is interesting. And if you haven't been keeping up with the state of things, or you've just been paying the renewal increases for your backup software, you definitely want to watch this video, because I'm also going to explain what's going on in this space and what's been going on for a couple of years now. And it's different than what you might assume. And this product is different than what you might assume. And this is it, out of the box, the DP7400. It has 12 bays. I've got it configured with a mix of 20 terabyte SATA hard drives and 4 terabyte SATA SSDs. At the rear, we've got two 10 gigabit ports, a management port that is dedicated, and you will need to connect that management port in order to make this thing happy, separate storage network and all. We've also got an RS-232 serial port, a couple of USB ports, and some open PCIe ports. There's actually more open PCIe ports internally. We'll take a look at that in a second. But yeah, this is a 2U rack mount, standard depth, 550 watt power supply, still dual redundant. A minor but amazing quality of life feature, the front grille on the hard drives, you can scan the barcode for each drive through the grill. So if you've got an asset manager or you want to find the exact drive that has died, boop, you can do that through the front. Nice. So you're telling me that if the power supply dies, Synology is going to have one in the mail probably before anything else happens. It's like, yeah, that is the idea with where Synology is going with their premium support options. I actually helped Synology work on it a little bit, at least in terms of like, hey, what do you need? This is what we need. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of how it's different. 8 memory channels, big beefy CPU, lots of PCIe slots. Not all of them are externally accessible, and a strange PCIe slot layout at that. This is a portent of things to come. If you follow other content that we've done here at Level 1 Techs, you know that even in our backup appliances and like this kind of thing, we usually go overkill because we do complicated things with the backup, dedupe, and complicated backup policies and that sort of thing. And here it is, a commercial solution. Would you look at that? Depending on what you want to do, ActiveProtect, the appliance, and the software can reduce or eliminate both cloud fees and software subscriptions in your backup stack, which will lead to significant cost savings across the whole solution. At least there's the potential for that, I think. And it's actually quite a bit more than that, because, you know, if it's like, okay, if you're going to pay for stuff, there has to be innovation. And I'm all for disruption because I think things have gotten a little stagnant here. But you might not know the state of things as I see them and how I think we got here. So let's talk about that for a second before we get into the actual Synology product, so that you can kind of see it from my vantage point. Look, backups are kind of complex, and the whole hotness with AI and turning everybody loose and AI hiding complexity, it's making things a little bit more insane when it comes to backups. If you get a rando with access to ChatGPT and it asks ChatGPT how to do something, you're going to be going to your backups. And managing backups is key. At the end of the day, I care that I've got enough replicas. I care that I've got enough of what I need for a quick restore to deal with the rando that's got ChatGPT. For whatever reason, I need something big restored, a whole virtual machine, or something little, file that somebody deleted and didn't tell me about until after they got back from vacation. I need to back up cloud tenants because, well, cloud tenants, depending on what the scenario is, the cloud hoster may not be able to recover your stuff. And putting all your backup needs in one backup egg basket, well, it's going to be on you when it fails, right? You're going to be the responsible person. That's really the rub. You buy a product that does this thing, at least it's supposed to do this thing, but it's not actually good enough. And so, if you, as the administrator or the CIO or the CTO, you select a solution that doesn't work as good in real life as it does on paper, which is generally how things go, it's still on you somehow to deal with the shortcomings of that. And you got to get more budget or free it up or do whatever. And so think of backups like necessary maintenance. Think of it like a puppy. The puppy is your data, your infrastructure, the servers, the continuity of technology. It has needs. It needs your attention. It needs your care and feeding and love. And you got to deal with the whole potty situation. Backups and recovery are a big part of that maintenance ecosystem. Just getting the server up and running, that's not enough. It's like the job's done, but the job's not actually done. No, you're not done. You have to make it easy to restore the backup. You have to be sure that you're backing up what you actually think you're backing up. Fun classic story is the backup software can't back up the file because the file's in use. So your backup runs, it does stuff. Nobody ever actually tries to restore the file. And guess what? The file doesn't restore because the file was in use. Generally, that's not a problem with modern backup solutions because it can take a snapshot, but you'd be surprised how often things like that can happen because like a database server doesn't get the snapshot signal and then it takes an inconsistent snapshot. So when you restore the database, it's like, I'm going to have to replay the logs to get that. And it's like, wait a minute, what? So in other words, part of the promise of this product is being able to offload some of that responsibility. If someone wants you to help them with something, I don't know, here, I'm going to touch this. It is somehow now my responsibility to see to its care and feeding from now until the end of time. Like, you just need a new USB cable. That's all you need. I've replaced your USB cable. And now I am responsible for literally all aspects of the device that have nothing to do with the USB cable. If you work in IT, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, I've got to help you troubleshoot your ability to save documents because the USB cable, right, yeah, okay. Backups and being able to recover from those quickly are the same kind of thing. Enter Veeam and products like Veeam. I've been using Veeam since before the company moved from its St. Petersburg headquarters. A very, very long time. And don't get me wrong, Veeam is and has always been basically a great product. It's a piece of software that does what it says it will do, does what it says it will do really well, and it is very vocal about letting you know when something has gone wrong. At least historically, that's been true. It does things like differential backups, and it's able to combine backup sets. It's able to do retention policies. It's able to do replication intelligently. It's able to restore with very fine granularity entire machines or down to single individual files. And what's really helping it take off is, managing virtual machine backups intelligently, or what helped it take off originally and continues to propel its success. In addition to being better than all of the incumbent backup solutions of the day, it was sort of a reimagining of what backup software should be. And so a lot of other backup solutions have become that, and they've become incumbent, and they've basically taken over the whole world. Fast forward to 2024, that's how we got there. And yes, there's some complexities and nuances there, and it's a lot more complex than it used to be. And I don't mean to pick on Veeam. I'm just still salty that a lot of these companies are going full Broadcom. They're making it harder and impossible to get reasonable pricing, and then you go to renew your subscription, and it's a double price or 2 or 3 times, and then you got to go back and forth and get like 3 or 4 quotes because they keep trying to jack up the price every year. Comment below if you've experienced that sort of stuff renewing your backup solution. So the promise from Synology is to try to get us away from as much of that as possible. I mean, some customers I know have been quoted north of $1,000 a month just to back up 100 virtual machines, just for the software part of it, not the hardware part, not anything else. Just it's like you're responsible for cloud destination, local destination, data center replication, 2 appliances. You gotta buy all that plus the software. But with an ActiveProtect appliance, you're going to do all of that. And there's not really a software subscription. That's what Synology wants to disrupt a bit. They want to sell you the hardware and the software as a package. If you want to think of it, I mean, there will be and there are subscription options, but you've got some cloud options around that. Mostly the subscription goes away into the cost of the total solution. And that is significantly less expensive overall when you think about the hardware and software combination solution. So I'm going to pop a hard drive out, and even before I explain, folks are looking at this label and they're saying, Synology Enterprise Series, SATA 20 terabytes. What? Oh, can you just tell me what models and vendors to pick from for actual drives? I don't want to buy a Synology hard drive. I mean, sure, Dell or HP or Lenovo do that. They all take drives and brand them and lock them down into their chassis. And I can assure you that CTOs notice that, and they do not like it. And here, in this case, it matters a bit less, I think, because you aren't responsible. It goes back to that responsibility thing for the drive. When you buy into the ecosystem, you spec and you get the drives, and Synology is responsible for this whole package. And that is interesting because responsibility, like I said, it's a puppy. If I elect to, DIY storage and something goes wrong, I'm going to be responsible for that. The premise with ActiveProtect is that the buck stops with Synology. And so because they're also monitoring this appliance as part of, the stuff, it's going to their cloud and reporting, and you have premier concierge service type stuff. They're very, very committed. If one of these drives craps out, this thing is not only sending you an email, Synology knows. And by Synology knows, I mean, you're going to get an alert saying the drive is having problems, but their tech support is going to have way less steps because they'll confirm it on their end and say, oh yeah, this drive has problems. So you get a replacement drive, and then they harass you about putting the replacement drive physically in next day as part of the warranty. I mean, that's a service that you've come to expect if you're buying a $200,000 SAN in the data center from Dell or Lenovo or HP, but you basically get the same service with their drives, which is why they want you to have just the appliance. And so, yeah, the Synology manager calling to harass you that you haven't put in a replacement drive or to ask you what's going on with the device, that's important. And it's not just, a drive has died. It's also performance metrics. When you look in the software and you're looking at certain things, it's like, I'm backing up from these virtual machines at these speeds. For some reason, this server is backing up very slowly, or this server is having trouble with replication, or I'm not able to do a snapshot because of this reason or that reason. It is a very, very comprehensive backup solution with very detailed logs, and it tells you when things are not necessarily wrong, but when things are a little bit sideways. And the proactive support and drive replacement and that sort of thing means that you're offloading some of your responsibility for monitoring and making sure that everything is properly configured and operating correctly, and that you're able to recover from ransomware, things like the immutability of those backups, 321 backup, replication, etc., etc. That means that the Synology is going to bear some of the responsibility of making sure that the solution is whole or complete. If you own or manage a business, but you're not super IT inclined, you don't 100% trust your IT person to be on top of it, something like this can give you peace of mind because you can log into the dashboard, you can log into the Synology website and see the status of the appliance on site without necessarily logging directly into the appliance on site. Who wouldn't want that, especially if you pay less overall for the total cost of the system when we're talking about the software and hardware from other solutions? So it's a long, rambly explanation because in that scenario, in my mind, it kind of does actually make sense. So then our task becomes, let's take ActiveProtect for a spin. Does it actually live up to the hype? Because this is, a product that is launching. At this stage, ActiveProtect is designed to support primarily VMware and Hyper-V deployments. It can also support bare metal Linux and KVM and Windows and Mac workstations, of course, with backup agent type solutions. The backup agent, piece of software that sits on the machine and does it. It can also back up file shares. So if you just have another device that presents an SMB share to the network, it'll back that up. And it'll do that with NetApp and Nutanix and a couple other solutions. And it does actually have pretty full support for KVM virtualization on Linux. And if you're thinking that also means that Proxmox support would work, or you could use XCP-ng, or no, I've got a full section on the Proxmox situation. Actually, it's doable, but it is not a replacement for the Proxmox backup appliance software. If you're using Proxmox, you're really better off running that as a virtual machine somewhere. And, for this kind of thing, use the chapter markers. Luke, use the chapter markers. For this video, we're going to take a look at Hyper-V on Windows Server 2025. Let's take a look at that, what I've got my setup for my server with my virtual machines, and then let's get into ActiveProtect. This machine, it's AMD EPYC, 64 cores, 128 threads. This is the 9575F. That is an insanely fast CPU, just absurdly fast. It's running a Supermicro H13 SSL, running Windows Server 2025 Data Center. This is a short depth Silverstone Rackmount case with a Silverstone AIO that, yes, that fits SP5. And I've got 384 gigabytes of DDR5 memory in here and fast PCIe Gen 5 internal storage thanks to the Kioxia CM7 SSDs that Kioxia sent for projects like this. Now, instead of DIY in a full chassis, I'd probably go with like a Supermicro rack mount server like we've covered in the past. This would easily fit in 2U, give you a ton more storage options and other connectivity, but Silverstone, short depth, this much horsepower that I'm able to DIY, yeah, it's sort of nuts. And this, as a standalone server, doesn't make a lot of sense, but with 3 of them in a cluster, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Hyper-V cluster has, the clustering end of Hyper-V has gotten a lot better in Windows Server 2025, and I've already got a bunch of virtual machines on here running Ubuntu, Windows 11, Windows Server 2025. This is the data center version of Windows Server 2025. There's a lot of really interesting stuff packed in here for videos. And so imagine this machine plus 2 others that are just like it, and you've got one heck of a cluster. It's easy to manage Hyper-V clustering now from outside of Active Directory, and that is really pretty amazing. It's easy to migrate machines from node to node. It's a really pretty slick setup. So with this context for what we're looking at in terms of our machine configuration, let's see what we can do with ActiveProtect on the software side of things. Out of the box, the setup for ActiveProtect could not be simpler. You start with a wizard, basically. You find it on your local network. At the rear, the default configuration, you've got the 2 10 gig ports and a management port. We'll talk a little bit about the 25 gig option. It's got PCIe slots, you can use them, but dual 10 gig, I think, makes sense for this kind of an appliance, and you can stack these, you can do a lot of interesting stuff. Plus the management port, it will not let you continue until you connect the management port. And that's important because, well, Hyper-V, VMware, even Proxmox, having a separate storage network just makes sense from a logical and organizational standpoint. You'll walk through the wizard, you'll set it up. It asks you some options about scrubbing, whether you want to scrub weekly or monthly or every 3 months. By default, it's on every 3 months. I think that's a reasonable default. I certainly wouldn't want to go more than that. And depending on what your needs are, scrubbing, monthly could make sense. This is just a process to go through and self-check internal consistency. It'll also let you turn on auto repair so that if you have a spare drive or if a drive goes down and you replace the drive, it'll automatically start repairing it. You don't have to log into the GUI. Nice. Once you get that, you're faced with the ActiveProtect Manager dashboard thingy. Now, I just reset this so it's completely empty. The empty dashboard is meant to be unassuming, and it is, but it hides a lot of interesting options. Backup copy status, not enabled. Go to copy servers or remote storage, and then enable copy backup protection in your protection plans. Yes, this is part of your comprehensive. This is good. This will help you pass an audit if you need an IT audit or, you have compliance issues that you have to deal with. Recent backups, and it shows you if you have any that are missed or unsuccessful or warnings or errors. And by the way, you can get this in a cloud report. You can get this emailed to you. You can have your CIO or your CTO get a copy of it, depending on the scale of your organization. A lot of cool options here. I'm going to start by just adding a single standalone machine. This is a standalone machine that's actually an instance under Proxmox because I was curious would it cause any weird stuff to happen, and I'm happy to report that no, nothing weird happens. But for this part, let's go over the sidebar features here. Under machines, you have the all option, which will show you physical servers and virtual machines, etc., etc. Because I have elected to install the backup client software in a virtual machine, it's labeling it as a physical server even though it's a virtual machine because it reserves the virtual machines option for hypervisors that it directly integrates with. And it can directly integrate with add hypervisors, Hyper-V and VMware, And also KVM. Like it's like you can do KVM, but it's like, Hyper-V and VMware. You get the option here in the dropdown where you get the VMware, vSphere, or Hyper-V standalone SCVMM or a failover cluster. And with Server 25, the failover cluster makes a lot of sense. But for physical servers, you can also add a physical server here that is a Linux Debian agent. And it does actually support KVM through this agent, but it doesn't support Proxmox's custom kernel, but we'll talk about that more in a second. Right now what we want to do is add our hypervisor. If you get everything correct, it's going to connect. It's going to connect to the Hyper-V services, SMB service. It's going to check and make sure that it's got a mountable user profile. It's doing all the steps that you would normally have to do manually or quasi-manually. This is our 9575F 64-core EPYC processor with 384 gigabytes of memory and a bunch of test virtual machines configured, each with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Oh, out of the box, Server 2025 has SMB v2 disabled. Not a big deal. And I'm told this is going to be fixed in a future version of ActiveProtect. So you can do get SMB server configuration, select enable SMB2 protocol. That should be true. All right, SMB service is successful. The other thing that you want to make sure is installed is the file server role. No big deal. Those are the things that can cause that to fail, basically. Anyway, with all of that successful, you can hit done. And then from the hypervisor's control panel here, you should be able to see a list of the virtual machines. So you can go to the virtual machines. Auto backup by cluster or folder. Individual backup by specific VM. Let's do the specific VMs. I've got an unruly crowd here. I don't need to back up literally everything. So let's back up all of these and not the busy one. All virtual machines have successfully been contacted. You're ready to go. Now keep in mind this is a mix of operating systems, Windows, Linux, desktop, whatever. Daily backup, sure, that sounds good. 6 items, done. Let's back up now. And this will just zip right along. And with that, we were able to successfully create some backups. Now, what does this say? Partially successful. What's going on? What's up with that? Why is it only the Linux machines? Well, it turns out it's because the file system, it needs to be able to take a production-aware snapshot. You see, when you've got databases and everything like that on a file system inside a virtual machine, you really need to notify the operating system itself in the virtual machine to take a snapshot. And there is actually a mechanism for doing that here in the client or through integration or whatever. But because this is a sort of a DIY thing that I've done with this distribution, it's not able to do that. Couldn't create a production checkpoint. This isn't really a big deal. You can configure that to work around it. So there's a couple hoops that you have to jump through, but yeah, this actually does work properly. And so from the sidebar here, you can manage your machines, add individual machines, PCs and Macs, Mac OS, and create a connection key and back up individual machines, workstations if you want, physical servers as I was explaining before, and also file servers. So file servers is really interesting. You can add SMB, NetApp, Nutanix, or other Synology NAS devices. And this is cool because if you're running virtual machines on another Synology NAS backup appliance, DHCP, some sort of specialty application, Home Assistant, whatever, you can back the state of the Synology NAS up and be able to restore it from the ActiveProtect appliance. But the ActiveProtect appliance will also be responsible for any other offsite or multi-site replication that you have set up. So all of that is configurable as easily as we set up the hypervisor, which is actually pretty awesome. The cloud applications functionality is at least as extensive as the bare metal and virtual machine backup as it is for cloud services. Microsoft Office 365, Google Compute, other cloud services. You can log into your Office 365 organization and back it up, back up your whole tenant, files, Office 365, Outlook, Exchange, the whole 9 yards. Don't overlook that. You need that. You'd be surprised, for ransomware or if you have an advanced persistent threat that's hanging out in your tenant for a long time, subtly manipulating things, Microsoft is not necessarily going to be able to help you recover in those situations. But you can create cloud backups here that follow whatever protection plan that you want. And protection plan here is not like a subscription plan or anything like that. You define a data protection plan for your organization and you start sort of there from your top-down plan. This is going to be an immutable protection plan. Backup data cannot be altered during the initial retention period. If you shorten the retention period, the change will only affect versions backed up afterward. So if you set a 30-day retention policy, the mechanism here will not let you shorten the backup lifetime or window. This is great ransomware protection. Out of the box, it comes with a daily backup plan for both Office 365, Microsoft 365, and a daily machine backup. And we've configured a 30-day retention here, so even if I wanted to, I can't delete my backups for 30 days. Interestingly, if you create a situation where you run out of storage, but you've got the immutable backups, you're just stuck. But the software does warn you that that is going to happen. It's like, hey, you've got maybe 3 days of backup space left, but your retention policy is going to cause this to last longer. So you get plenty of warning that that's about to happen before the device is completely full. But if you're on that kind of trajectory, what do you do? Then all of a sudden the dedupe features become a lot more important. So because I have a bunch of very similarly configured virtual machines with very similar operating systems, and I've let it sit here and churn for a little while, it's reduced, my reduction ratio is 34.37 to 1. Because I mostly don't have unique data. It's mostly operating system data and everything else. So even though I've backed up a terabyte of information, we're really only using about 100 gigabytes, give or take. Well, less than 100 gigabytes if it's a 34.37 to 1 reduction. It's a 97% reduction. That's pretty darn good. So what about restores? Well, let's open the recovery portal. And the recovery portal is a little different depending on if you're running Linux or Windows. But you can see here that in my virtual machine, because I'm doing EFI virtual machines, I do have an EFI volume as well as the actual, boot volume. And I'm able to use the File Explorer and go right to the file that I want to restore. Now, I can download the file directly from here and open it, or I can restore it to the virtual machine. So I can do an instant restore, quickly restart the virtual machine to reduce your service downtime. The restored machines may have limited I/O performance until you migrate them back to the production site. Or do a full restore entire virtual machines with full I/O performance. This method requires more time and resources. Basically, do you want to run the virtual machine from the appliance or copy it over the network? And a 10 gigabit, 127 gigabyte image, if you have to do a full restore and not everything is there, it is going to take a very, very long time. In this case, I only want to restore one file. Interestingly, it asks you which platform you want to restore to VMware vSphere. I didn't test restoring, using this as a migration tool to go from VMware to Hyper-V. That seems silly, but as this came from Hyper-V, it sort of makes the next question is select a restore mode. Restore to the original location, restore to a new location. This seems like it's going to restore the entire virtual machine. Really, I just want to restore the one file to the virtual machine. All right, so version, restore type, VM, hypervisor host, yes. And so this is actually going to restore the entire virtual machine just to recover a single file, or you can download the single file. This because this is a Linux machine. So I don't actually want to restore the entire virtual machine just to get a file. I can just download the file. That's fine. Similar options on Windows. I can just download the individual file that I need. It doesn't want me to download desk.ini because that's an internal Windows file, so that's fine. Now, if you want to restore the virtual machine to a new virtual machine, it does give you that option, and it also asks you where you would like to store it. You can create a new folder or navigate to a folder, and it will let you browse the running hypervisor and browse to a disk and restore it, and you can pick a folder and pick which thing that you want to restore and go through the adapter, pick the network switch, and so it will walk you through a full Hyper-V restore where the restore is actually going to recreate the virtual machine. It'll create a new virtual machine and that is an option for doing restoration, which is totally okay. It's a perfectly valid strategy. Now for remote storage, you can add another ActiveProtect appliance. You can use Synology's C2 object storage, and you can also use Amazon S3. Now the Amazon S3 feature I found really interesting because S3 is a pretty well documented protocol, and you can add the access key and the access secret, and all that works fine. What I would like to see here is another text box for the REST endpoint, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in shortcomings. But if you add the REST endpoint here, then you can host this on an S3 compatible service. Amazon is the most expensive storage you can get. You can do your own S3 storage, and it's completely fine, usable, cheaper, better, faster, stronger from a million other providers, or host your own. I mean, heck, you could host your own with an inexpensive storage appliance and have something that's S3 compatible and use that for remote storage or extra room. Now, with the software part out of the way, I think it starts to make sense why the hardware and software is the way that it is. It's sort of the whole solution that Synology is offering here, and they're hoping will disrupt the market. As this is configured with dual 10 gig and SSDs and mechanical storage, it was shockingly fast. See, it doesn't just have 20 terabyte SATA hard drives in it. We also have SSDs drives as well. And yeah, open source solutions are going to struggle a little bit with that SSD caching thing. And the SSD caching thing really let this thing run super, super fast. These are 4 terabyte SATA drives. The speed was very impressive. This is one of the things that pure open source solutions will struggle with a little bit, because on the open source side, I mean, there's projects that are promising, like Bcache that's kind of half-baked right now, but could be good. And streaming backups, if you've got a lot of streaming backups going to a ZFS pool, that really starts to look like a random I.O. to the ZFS pool, and you need a lot of spindles to deal with a lot of random I.O. Whereas what Synology has done here, because it's able to use, SATA and mechanical storage effectively, plus up to 8 memory channels and loads of CPU horsepower. My configuration with both SSDs and hard drives handles both speedy performance and bulk storage really well, including lots of random I.O., including backing up 8 virtual machines simultaneously. I put a dual port 25 gig adapter in here with both the SSDs and mechanical hard drives, and I could actually saturate one 25 gigabit port in some scenarios, but really dual 10 gigabit is all you really need for this. Deduplication also requires a lot of CPU horsepower and careful architecture of the whole solution. So if you're thinking open source for that, Synology makes it all point and click. Again, they bear the responsibility if it doesn't perform well versus a DIY solution. You can definitely run into some landmines with deduplication on ZFS, for example. I tried to create some common scenarios where dedupe would cause performance issues, but the dedupe here seems to be very clever. The software seems to be set up so that the deduplication part of it is not going to interfere with ongoing backup jobs, even if that means that temporarily things are going to take up a lot more space and then the dedupe can run in the background as background job. That seems to be how it's set up, which makes sense. And I get why they put so much horsepower in this chassis for ActiveProtect. I mean, that's the thing that we do on this channel. Look, the home NAS is, it's like, we need to build an 8-core plus home NAS. And it's because you can add lots of cool features. The dashboard here also clearly shows the state of things at a granular level. And this gives me peace of mind, because this is part of why I was impressed with this. With just a couple of clicks, I could get the full site going. 100 virtual machines for the setup really would be no problem. And versus if you're DIYing something and you're backing up 100 virtual machines and you miss one, that can be a catastrophically bad situation for the business. Because this configuration has the mix of SSDs and mechanical hard drives, backing up 100 virtual machines across the cluster of 3 Windows Server 2025 machines, basically a non-issue. I was expecting the mechanical hard drives would be a bit of an issue, but no, it actually was rock solid. This also is a problem, like for differential backups. You can get some pretty bad fragmentation, and no, it was fine. I would really like to see Bcache and BTRFS and dedupe working as well on an open source solution, but it'd probably take a few $1 million to pull that. Anybody got a few $1 million? We could put a team together, get the developers that are working on it paid, add some more developers, get past some roadblocks, solve some political issues, especially around that Bcache thing. But I digress. Backups. Let's talk about backups. I'm here for it. I'm here for the disruption. And literally anything to move the needle forward. Not only that, but like what they're doing with the web UI would probably give open source solutions an idea for things to improve. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like this kind of user interface. The help in the top corner, it's like, this is the philosophy. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it this way. Combined with the hand-holding of the premium support, and then the total cost of ownership, it starts to make sense as a product. So far, I like what I see, and they did respond positively to the many, many things that I gave them feedback about. And it's nice to see a lot of that rolled into the product. It's nice to see that they sort of take feedback and they're like, yeah, that's a good thing that we should do. There's also a thread on the Level 1 Tech's forums talking about backup solutions. So if you don't comment below with a story about your backup solution or where it's burned you or things that you'd love to see in a backup solution, your pain points, experiences, whatever, contribute on the forum, because yeah, I'm going to probably do another video on a regular NAS, also Synology, but running the Proxmox backup appliance as a virtual machine, which has some of the same features, but is definitely nowhere near as user-friendly. So look for that. They need to add some more stuff. So what I say is missing from ActiveProtect? Well, they've got to start on a lot of things. You have to understand that this is kind of a 1.0 release for ActiveProtect. I mean, not really, it's very functional, there's a lot here, but there was a lot of stuff that I would add. I mean, when I'm setting up the application for remote storage, S3, as I mentioned, that is kind of an oversight. And there's a lot more options for remote storage other than S3. Part of this may be because of the way that deduplication and compression works, because sometimes you can't really just use a file dump or a file share. You're going to need some more advanced functionality, and certainly the ActiveProtect Vault will give it all the advanced functionality that it needs to have a replica of one of these, off-site. And if you have one of these replicated off-site, you're going to have the same web GUI, you're going to have the same everything else. So there's a lot of reasons to, stay in the family, as it were, and have two identical boxes, one local and one remote, and they maintain synchronization, replication, whatever. Makes sense, I get it. And S3 may be a little bit of a Pandora's box, and like, well, we can support that on the Amazon side, but, backing up terabytes and terabytes of information to S3, very expensive. You could back it up to your own S3 compatible appliance, but you'll need to be able to set the endpoint. Also, the KVM integration, even though under the physical servers functionality, you can add Linux, and it is KVM aware, it's not going to add the virtual machines in the virtual machine section. And it doesn't deal super well with Linux virtual machines running under the Hyper-V hypervisor. Actually, if you add the Hyper-V guest enlightenments to the Linux operating system, that does work, but you're kind of back into the, well, if you're running a custom kernel, things can get a little dicey. If you're running a perfectly supported official Linux distro, especially Red Hat, SUSE, one of the long-term support Ubuntu distributions where you haven't gone off the rails doing custom stuff in the kernel, then that plus the Hyper-V enlightenments, and you will be able to notify the operating system about the snapshot, and everything sort of works there. The help text here really should just point you to doing those things. Like, you shouldn't necessarily expect an administrator to know those things. You should prompt the administrator with things like, hey, by the way, did you install the Hyper-V guest enlightenments? Or like the SMB error, it would be useful if it popped up and said, hey, this is probably the situation with your server 2025 configuration. Maybe go do these things in PowerShell to make sure that the stuff that I need for this is enabled. It does some of that. I could see that it was in the security logs. I could see that it was running PowerShell commands and doing a lot of really fancy stuff to enable the Windows remote management thing on the standalone. The cluster side, also not shown here, is similarly very functional. So if you have a cluster member down and for some reason you also need to restore from backup, this thing actually handles those kinds of edge cases really well. So they've put a lot of work into the actual complicated stuff, just needs a little bit more polish. So that's nice, and that's easy low-hanging fruit they can do now that the product is launched, as it were. The lack of Proxmox functionality, I'm of two minds. Proxmox Backup Server is really what Proxmox intends for you to use, and it is a little philosophically different than how Microsoft thinks of backups and Windows Server Backup that's out of the box. It's like, even with the data center version, it's just kind of like, ugh. And then other solutions like from Nutanix and XCP-ng, the Citrix thing. So like those all have different philosophical approaches to how they handle backups and how they want to work with backups. And so I kind of get why Synology doesn't want to touch that. But at the same time, if there was just a little bit of a facility here for running a virtual machine and I could host the Proxmox backup server here, then that would give the Proxmox people an API that they could connect to and get status from Proxmox about deduplication, which it does, and snapshots and data retention and all that, which it does. And immutability and some of those things you can do with the data sets, but it's not a perfect solution on the Proxmox side. And I would feel better about it if I was doing some type of replication with this. Ironically, if you have another Synology NAS, like the 3400D, the dual node one, which is very nice, and I've done a video on in the past, and I'm going to have some video coming up in the future for a Proxmox setup for this. You can run the virtual machine on that, and then you can use this to back up the Synology NAS. So you can get your 321, but you're going to need two pieces of Synology equipment, one that's a normal NAS, and then the other one that is this thing doing your immutability and your backups and that sort of thing. So the Proxmox backup server runs as a virtual machine on the other Synology NAS, and the data that generates is replicated here. And that's a reasonable solution, but I think that plus the API integration might be a little cleaner. And, you know, who knows, depending on what direction Broadcom goes with VMware, those developers may be freed up to work on other sorts of things. And those are really, really minor things in the overall scheme of things. It's pretty obvious from looking at this interface that Synology wants you to stay laser focused on the things that they're good at. And I get it, and it makes sense. And that will make a disruptive product when you look at total cost of ownership and everything else. There's some shortcomings we discussed, but overall, this is a market that needs disruption. So, yeah. I'm one of this level 1. Let's chat about your experiences in the forum or in the comments below. All right, I'm signing out, and I'll see you in the forum.